What happens when a decorated American fighter decides to challenge a silent British guard right in front of Buckingham Palace? No threats, no warning, just one spinning heel kick that knocks the guard's hat off and turns a tourist stunt into a lesson in real power. But what if the man everyone thought was just ceremonial turned out to be the most dangerous person in the crowd? Today, we're not talking about fame, flash, or fighting for cameras. We're talking about discipline, control, and what happens when quiet strength finally answers back. It looked like just another morning in London. Tourists lined the gates of Buckingham Palace, cameras in hand, ready to witness the famous changing of the guard. But for a few seconds that would soon ripple around the world, the show wasn't the ceremony. It was a man named Marcus Wade. At 33, Marcus was a three-time martial arts champion from Chicago, known for his brash style, luxury lifestyle, and a habit of proving himself in public. Dressed in a designer jacket and flanked by two friends filming on their phones, Marcus walked straight up to one of the royal guards and started circling him like he was back in the ring. The guard, Private First Class Oliver Radcliffe, stood motionless, eyes forward, spine rigid, expression unreadable beneath the towering bearskin hat. That silence, meant to represent discipline and duty, was exactly what Marcus locked onto. "What kind of soldier doesn't flinch?" he sneered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You're just a statue in a uniform. This isn't combat. This is theater." Some laughed. Others weren't so sure. Among the crowd stood Harold Evans, 68 years old, a retired corrections officer from Baltimore. He wasn't filming. He didn't raise his phone or speak, but his jaw clenched slowly. Harold had spent decades working in a system where stillness was often mistaken for weakness, where staying calm could be the difference between diffusing a fight or becoming part of it. He had seen young men rise fast because they talked loud, and fall faster because they never learned when to be quiet. As Marcus continued to provoke the guard, snapping punches into the air and making mocking bows, Harold's gaze didn't waver. He had seen this pattern before, not in a palace but in a prison yard. The ones who pushed hardest often didn't realize how close they were to crossing a line they couldn't step back from. Marcus raised his hands like a showman, inviting more eyes, and still the guard didn't move. But this time, the silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. And this time, the man being mocked wasn't the one losing control of the room. The jokes started to wear thin. At first, the crowd around Marcus Wade chuckled at his performance, some amused, others simply caught in the rhythm of spectacle. But as the minutes dragged on, his gestures grew sharper, louder. He jabbed the air near Oliver Radcliffe's face, stepped in close enough for his shadow to swallow the guard's boots. The laughter died down, replaced by quiet frowns and lowered phones. A few tourists stepped back. Parents whispered to their children, urging them behind barriers. What had begun as a light-hearted moment was quickly souring into something else. Marcus seemed unaware. Or maybe he didn't care. He raised his voice again, pacing in circles. "You're trained to ignore me, right? But what if I don't play by your rules?" His foot tapped the ground near Oliver's shin, then again, this time closer. What kind of soldier lets someone get this close? Still, Oliver didn't move. Across the square, Harold Evans hadn't shifted an inch. His arms were crossed, but not out of comfort, out of memory. He had seen this play out before, not on cobblestones but on concrete floors inside detention units. Young men trying to provoke authority figures, pushing past boundaries to test how far they could go. Most didn't think of the consequence. They only saw the reaction they wanted to force. Harold remembered one in particular. A kid named Devin, 18, too smart for his own good. Kept taunting a new guard who had the patience of stone, kept pressing harder and harder. And when the guard finally responded, clean, efficient, without rage, it was over in 3 seconds. Devin limped for weeks. But what broke him wasn't the pain. It was the realization that the person he thought was weak had been holding back all along. That's what Harold saw in Oliver now. Not fear, not confusion, not even discomfort, just calculation, focus, restraint. But Marcus didn't see it. Or didn't want to. He turned his back to the guard, raised his arms to the crowd like a prizefighter waiting for cheers. "See, told you. He's nothing but a mannequin. This is what they call elite around here?" Someone in the back muttered, "That's enough." But Marcus didn't hear it. He spun again, Quicker this time. His sneakers skidded slightly on the stone, and as he circled for what felt like the 10th time, there was a change. Barely visible, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Oliver shifted his left foot half an inch. Not a retreat, not a threat. A signal. Harold's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that kind of movement before, in training rooms, in combat footage. It wasn't the beginning of violence. It was the end of warnings. And the air around the palace suddenly felt colder. It happened fast, but not without warning. Marcus Wade widened his stance, bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, and with a smirk aimed at the nearest camera, launched into a spinning heel kick. The crowd gasped even before his foot connected. It wasn't a brush, it wasn't near-miss theater. His heel struck Oliver Radcliffe square across the face, just beneath the brim of the towering bearskin hat. The impact sent the hat flying, skidding across the stone pavement. A hush fell over the square like a dropped curtain. Oliver didn't fall. He didn't flinch. He just turned. For the first time since the confrontation began, his eyes met Marcus's. Not with rage, not with shock, but with a cold, unshaken clarity. His body still upright, his breathing still steady. It wasn't adrenaline that held him up. It was training, muscle memory, composure carved from experience. Marcus stepped back, unsure for the first time. "Hey, relax, man, it's just a show, right?" He half laughed, half stammered. But the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. Phones dropped to their sides. Conversations halted mid-breath. Harold Evans felt a familiar sensation in his chest, a quiet, rising pressure he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not excitement, recognition. He'd seen those eyes before, in the mirror after long shifts, in fellow officers returning from riot lines, in soldiers at funerals trying to hold it together. The look didn't say, "I'm angry." It said, "I've waited long enough." At that moment, Oliver raised his right hand, not in retaliation, but to remove the remains of the strap now hanging from his shoulder. Deliberate, calm. The gesture didn't draw attention like Marcus's theatrics had. It didn't need to, because every motion was now being studied like the trigger of something no longer avoidable. Behind Marcus, one of his friends called out, "Yo, chill bro, just back off." But Marcus hesitated. Pride clashed with instinct. He had just struck a man on camera. If he backed down now, he'd be mocked in every comment section for months. But if he escalated, he couldn't control what came next. He chose wrong. He stepped forward. Oliver didn't. He simply adjusted his balance, dropped slightly at the knees, and locked his stance. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing changed. But Harold saw it. So did a few others who had worn a uniform at some point in their life. That wasn't stillness anymore. That was readiness. And whatever Marcus thought was going to happen next, he was already too late to stop it. Marcus Wade raised his fists, but they were clumsy now. The crowd could see it. He was no longer performing. He was uncertain. There was no more control in his posture, only hesitation wrapped in bravado. He took another step forward, but by then, Oliver Radcliffe had already moved. Not with anger. Not with speed for the sake of show, just precision. His left hand caught Marcus's wrist mid-swing, rotating it with a sharp twist that dropped the younger man's shoulder out of alignment. Before Marcus could react, Oliver stepped inside, turned his hips, and with a single controlled motion, dropped Marcus to the ground. No unnecessary force, no rage, just technique refined by repetition. Marcus hit the pavement with a dull thud, more shocked than hurt, at least for now. The crowd gasped. Some stepped forward. Others simply froze. Oliver didn't pursue. He didn't speak. He didn't even look down in triumph. He positioned himself squarely between Marcus and the palace gates, 1 foot forward, eyes steady, breathing measured. Harold Evans hadn't blinked. He watched not as a spectator, but as someone who understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a fight. This was restraint in its purest form. Harold had seen what it looked like when a man wanted to inflict damage. He had also seen what it looked like when someone did what was necessary, nothing more, nothing less. Oliver could have broken Marcus's arm. He didn't. He could have struck his face, his ribs, anything exposed. He didn't. He simply neutralized the threat. And in doing so, sent a message that no words could carry. Marcus scrambled to his feet, face flushed, pride shattered. He lunged again, more out of embarrassment than strategy. Oliver sidestepped, grabbed the back of his jacket, and guided him down once more, this time pinning him gently but firmly with a knee to the upper back. Not enough to harm, just enough to end it. A pair of palace security officers were already moving in, but they slowed as they approached. Not because they feared Oliver, but because they recognized what they saw. Training, professionalism, control. For Harold, it brought back too much. Times when people assumed silence meant weakness. Times when he had to step in and stop something before it spiraled, even if he'd be questioned afterward. He remembered the weight of being expected to be calm when others were wild. It wasn't easy. It wasn't natural. It was earned. And Oliver had earned every ounce of that calm. As Marcus was gently handed over to security, he didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just looked up, face red, pride bruised, chest rising with ragged breaths, and met Oliver's gaze. It was the first time he didn't have something to say, and for once the silence was his. The press didn't take long. By early evening, headlines were circling online. American fighter assaults royal guard at Buckingham Palace. But those who were there, those who watched the silence hold, then break with force, they knew the story wasn't about a tourist gone too far. It was about a man in uniform who chose discipline when he had every reason not to. And as the crowd dispersed, a few stayed behind, not to gawk, not to film, just to process what they had witnessed. That's when Harold Evans heard a voice behind him. "Name's Commander Richard Fallon, retired Royal Marines. I trained that man." Harold turned. The man looked to be in his early 70s, lean frame, crisp posture, no wasted motion in the way he spoke. There was something old school in his tone, less about pride, more about principle. "He's not just a ceremonial guard," Fallon continued. "Oliver Radcliffe served in the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, multiple deployments, Afghanistan, Syria. He was part of a unit that monitored high-risk zones behind enemy lines. We're talking months in the field, no backup, no extraction unless things went bad. You think standing still for a few hours is hard? That man has stood still in worse places with far more at stake." Harold nodded slowly. He understood now what he had sensed before. This wasn't just about defending a tradition or upholding a code. Oliver had been trained not just to fight, but to wait, to assess, to respond with accuracy, not emotion. "He's rotated into ceremonial duty this year," Fallon said. "That's how we do it now. These aren't stage props. These men are active duty, elite, still in service, just in a different uniform for a while. Because the greatest form of readiness is knowing how to stand down until the moment you can't." For Harold, it was a revelation, not because he doubted Oliver's capability, but because it confirmed what so many forget. Appearances mean little. It's what people carry inside that matters. Their training, their judgment, their experience. You can't see those things from the outside. But when they show, they don't need explanation. He thought back to his first years on the job, how the loudest officers were usually the most dangerous, the most unpredictable. It was the quiet ones, the composed ones who saved lives, who knew when to step in and when to wait. Oliver never wanted to be the story. That much was clear. He didn't gesture, didn't look around for validation. He simply picked up his bearskin hat, brushed it off, and handed it to one of the junior guards who'd been standing in formation nearby. A nod, no words, and then he disappeared into the courtyard as if none of it had happened, but it had. And Harold, watching from the edge of the crowd, whispered to himself, "That's the kind of man you want next to you when things go sideways." Most people think strength is loud, a raised voice, a clenched fist, a dramatic reaction that tells the world, "I'm not afraid." But real strength doesn't need to declare itself. It waits, it watches, and when the time comes, it acts, not out of ego, but out of necessity. That's what Oliver Radcliffe embodied. Not just in the moment he brought Marcus Wade to the ground, but in everything that led up to it. The stillness, the refusal to be baited, the control over every muscle, every instinct that told him to respond earlier. It wasn't passivity, it was power. Commander Richard Fallon had said it clearly. This kind of discipline isn't just about training, it's about identity. You have to understand, he told Harold Evans as they walked together past the gates. For soldiers like Oliver, restraint isn't weakness. It's their highest form of readiness. In combat, the person who strikes first isn't always the one who survives. It's the one who knows exactly when to move and when not to. Harold knew that truth better than most. During his years as a corrections officer, he had seen restraint misread 1,000 different ways. colleagues accused of being soft, decisions second-guessed because they didn't match the crowd's emotion. But every time chaos came knocking, it was the ones who held the line, calm, methodical, steady, who brought people through it. He recalled one night in 1993. There was a standoff in the West Wing. Inmates were shouting, the tension thick in the air. Harold stood between two opposing groups, radio crackling in his ear, knowing one wrong word could trigger a chain of violence. He kept still, kept breathing, kept his voice low and even. It took 12 minutes to de-escalate that situation. 12 minutes of doing nothing that looked heroic, but 12 minutes that saved lives. That memory came rushing back as Harold watched footage of the incident on someone's phone. Over and over, the same loop. Marcus pacing, mocking, provoking, then the kick, then the calm response. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, it was surgical. What Oliver did that day wasn't just a reaction, it was a message, a lesson. In a world addicted to noise, restraint is misunderstood, misjudged, undervalued. But for those who've carried real responsibility, who've known that one action can shift everything, restraint is the mark of someone who's seen enough not to seek trouble, but strong enough to end it when it arrives. And as Harold walked away from the palace, he felt something settle in his chest. A sense of quiet pride, not in what had happened, but in the fact that the world had seen it. Unfiltered, unstaged. Just a man doing his duty and doing it right. It didn't take long for the consequences to arrive. Within 24 hours, Marcus Wade was formally charged with assaulting a member of the armed forces during official duty. The footage was clear. His kick wasn't a stunt gone wrong. It was an act of aggression, caught from 3 different angles and verified by multiple witnesses. There were no excuses to hide behind, no edits to twist the narrative. For Marcus, the reality didn't set in until he was alone. No cameras, no entourage, just a narrow holding cell and a copy of the charge sheet placed in front of him. His lawyer advised him to cooperate. "The footage speaks for itself," he said. "You pushed past the line, and now the law's going to show you where it stands." Marcus didn't argue. Not this time, because somewhere deep beneath his bruised ego, something had started to shift. He kept replaying the moment, not the kick, but what came after, that second when Oliver Radcliffe looked at him. No threat, no anger, just complete control. A man who knew exactly who he was and who didn't need to prove it to anyone. That look stuck with Marcus more than the takedown itself. It wasn't humiliation he felt, it was recognition. Because for the first time in years, Marcus saw what discipline really looked like. Back in Chicago, his reputation had been built on noise. Highlights, sound bites, flash. He trained hard, but he marketed harder. Every victory came with a caption. Every gym session with a boast. But now none of that mattered. Not in the eyes of the law. And certainly not in comparison to a man who stood silent and won every inch of the moment. Harold Evans watched the news unfold from his living room. Sitting in a worn leather recliner, remote in one hand, the volume low. He didn't smile. He didn't shake his head. He just watched. Because he knew this wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. Too many times, he had seen people with power, whether muscle, money, or position, believe they were untouchable. That rules bent for them. That control was something they enforced on others, not something they exercised on themselves. But this time, the system didn't flinch. It acted, and for once, it acted right. Later that evening, when the charges were read publicly, a reporter asked about the message this incident sent. One official responded simply, "Our soldiers are trained not only to fight, but to withstand. And when they are provoked, they respond as professionals. Not because they are weak, but because they know what real strength demands." Harold muted the television. He didn't need to hear more. Because some lessons, once spoken clearly, don't need to be repeated. There were no reporters in the room, no camera crews, no social media posts waiting to go viral. Just a quiet meeting arranged behind closed doors, at Marcus Wade's request. The public didn't need to see it. This wasn't for image repair. It was something else entirely. Oliver Radcliffe arrived in uniform, not out of ceremony, but because it was part of who he was. Marcus stood as he entered, unsure of how to begin. He had spent his whole life talking, performing, commanding attention. But now, words felt foreign, heavy. "I came to say I'm sorry," Marcus said, eyes lowered. "Not because I got caught, not because it went viral. Because I was wrong." Oliver didn't respond right away. He took a seat across from him, folding his hands neatly on the table. His posture was relaxed, but grounded. His presence carried the same weight it did that day, unspoken, unshaken. "I thought I understood strength," Marcus continued. "I built everything I have around it. But watching you, how you stood there, how you responded, I've never seen anything like that. I didn't respect it at first, I do now." Oliver finally spoke. His voice was calm, even, not cold, but stripped of any need to impress. "Most people only recognize strength when it's loud. That's what you were taught. It's not your fault, but it's not the full picture." He paused, then added, "When you've had real IEDs go off 10 feet away from you, a kick to the face doesn't change much." Marcus let out a breath, almost a laugh, but it wasn't humor. It was humility. "You didn't have to go easy on me," he said. "I didn't," Oliver replied. "I did exactly what needed to be done. No more, no less." Silence settled again, but it was different this time. Not awkward, not tense, just full of things understood but left unsaid. For Marcus, this moment wasn't about forgiveness. It was about learning what kind of man he wasn't, and what kind he still might become. No one had taught him that power could exist in quiet. That control was the most dangerous form of force because it required discipline far beyond muscle. He stood to leave, then hesitated. "I know I can't undo it," he said, "but I'll carry it forward." Oliver nodded, not with approval, but with acknowledgement, as if to say, "That's your work now." As Marcus stepped out into the gray London afternoon, the air felt different, not lighter, just more honest, and behind him, Oliver remained seated for a moment longer, eyes calm, shoulders still. Some fights leave bruises. This one left a mark deeper than that. The next morning, tourists gathered once again outside Buckingham Palace. The same dates, the same ceremony, but something felt different. They weren't just there to snap pictures of tradition. They were watching with a different kind of attention, quieter, more focused. And when Oliver Radcliffe returned to his post, dressed in the same red uniform, bearskin hat restored, boots polished to a mirror shine, no one laughed. No one called out for him to flinch. They watched, respectfully. He stood as he always had, motionless, steady, eyes forward, but this time everyone could see what they had missed before. The weight in his posture, the calm in his breathing, the discipline that wasn't about compliance but command. No words spoken, no gestures offered. Yet the message was clear. Strength is not in the reaction, it's in the restraint. A few rows behind the crowd, Harold Evans stood with his coat zipped to the collar, hands in his pockets. He didn't bring a phone. He wasn't here for footage, he was here for closure. To witness the return of order, not because the world demanded it, but because a man chose it. He thought of all the moments in life when people misread him, when his silence was taken as weakness, when his refusal to escalate made others think he was afraid. But now, watching Oliver hold his post with quiet dignity, Harold felt something settle deep in his chest. A truth too long overlooked, finally visible. Nearby, a young boy tugged on his father's jacket and whispered, "Is that the soldier from the video?" His father nodded. "Yes, that's him." The boy stared for a long time, then stood a little straighter. Inside the gates, Commander Fallon looked on from a distance. He didn't speak, he didn't smile. But he watched with the stillness of a man who knew the battle was already won. Not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, but in the way people now understood what they had once ignored. No applause, no dramatics, just a shift, subtle, permanent. Because some of the most powerful lessons in life aren't taught through speeches. They're shown. In how a man stands, in how he holds the line, in how he chooses not to strike when every instinct says otherwise. And sometimes, that's all it takes. In a world that often rewards noise over nuance, the story of Oliver Radcliffe reminds us that real strength doesn't demand attention. It earns respect in silence. His refusal to retaliate out of ego, his measured response under pressure, and his unwavering discipline teach us a powerful lesson. Restraint is not weakness. It's a higher form of strength, one that comes from experience, clarity, and purpose. For those of us who've been misunderstood for staying calm, who've chosen dignity over reaction, this story offers quiet validation. It reminds us that we don't have to prove our worth through force or volume. Sometimes the most impactful moments happen when we choose not to escalate. Whether you're a retired veteran, a teacher, a parent, or simply someone who's seen the world at its worst, you know how rare and necessary this kind of control is. In everyday life, it could mean walking away from a provocation, holding steady during a family dispute, or responding with calm in a chaotic workplace. These aren't signs of surrender. They're signs of someone who knows what matters. And perhaps the greatest takeaway is this: when the time is right, truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be seen. Press 1 if you've ever felt powerless in the face of abuse. Press 2 if you still believe quiet integrity can prevail. And if this story stirred something in you, share it, because respect doesn't need to shout to be heard. If you want more true stories where discipline and dignity still matter, subscribe. Don't miss the moments that remind us who we are and who we can be.